Time and again, the Black Sea has been the arena of geopolitical strife. Of the 6 nations that surround the shores of the sea, Turkey and Russia have played the most distinguished role in the shaping of the periphery. The two spent most of their histories in bitter rivalry, fighting no less than 12 wars. Each conflict was, in one way or another, motivated by the prices in and around the Black Sea. Though names and identities have changed over time, those prizes are still there. The Kremlin's military intervention in Crimea in 2014 and Abkhazia in 2008 suggests that the struggle for supremacy in the Black Sea is alive and well in the 21st century. So what makes the region worth fighting for? To find out, we must explore the geopolitics of the Black Sea. I'm your host Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. The Black Sea has been the subject of great works of art as well as the site of dramatic combat and suffering. It's called the Black Sea because of its inhospitable nature. Strong winds blowing in from Russia whip up waves that are several meters high, making navigation dangerous for small vessels. From a distance, the body of water seems enclosed and even isolated. That observation couldn't be further from the truth. All the coastal nations, even neighboring landlocked nations, rely on open access to the Black Sea for a substantial portion of their imports and exports. So the seemingly enclosed Black Sea in fact connects and integrates the nearby societies with the global community. Trade, therefore, is the most common avenue of the sea. There are at least 30 operating merchant seaports in the Black Sea, but the single most strategic space is the Sea of Marmara, which is an inland sea to the south that lies entirely within the borders of Turkey. By the way of the Bosporus and Dardanelles, the Marmara Sea connects the Black Sea to the Aegean and from there to the Mediterranean. These valuable sites in the Marmara Sea are controlled exclusively by the Turks from their grand city of Istanbul. Thus, any alteration of power in the Black Sea domain immediately involves Turkey. There's no way around this. Historically, control of the Turkish Straits resulted in fierce conflicts, most recently during World War I, when the British and their French, Australian, and New Zealander allies attempted to occupy the Dardanelles at Gallipoli. That effort failed, and the question of the Turkish Straits was ultimately settled by the Montreux Convention of 1936. The convention established strict mechanisms regarding the passage of naval warships. For instance, while commercial vessels were guaranteed the freedom of navigation, the passage of military ships in number, tonnage, and duration of stay is restricted, even more so for navies that are not indigenous to the Black Sea. The treaty also grants Ankara the legal power to limit the passage of commercial and military ships during an armed conflict. However, the understanding of what constitutes an armed conflict is entirely up to the Turks, for they have complete sovereignty over the straits. So basically, the Montreux Convention grants Turkey a legal layer of defense in addition to its physical advantages in the Marmara Sea. They decide who comes in and who leaves. To the north sits Russia, the strongest power native to the Black Sea. Though enormous in size, Russia has no year-round warm water port with open access to the world's oceans. There are Russian ports in the Arctic Circle and in the Far East. However, those require the operation of expensive icebreakers to keep the waterways navigable during the winter. The only year-round navigable ports Russia has are located in the Black Sea, but those rely on the Turkish choke points for access with the global community. This lack of a dependable warm water port has been a driving impetus in Russian geopolitics for centuries and continues to shape its foreign policy. Elsewhere in Russia, the rivers Don and Kuban connect Russia's socio-economic core with the Black Sea. The Don, for instance, is commercially navigable as far as upstream as the city of Voronezh, making it the busiest trade river in southern Russia. Meanwhile, the Kuban River connects the Northwest Caucasus to the Black Sea and thereby strengthens Moscow's hold over its multi-ethnic southern territories. Both rivers flow into the Sea of Azov, which is another inland body of water. Situated between Russia and Ukraine, The Azov Sea is connected to the Black Sea through the Strait of Kerch. This narrow strait is about 3 kilometers wide at its narrowest crossing, and it's the site of the newly constructed Russian bridge that connects the Russian mainland to the Crimean Peninsula. Taken together, the Don and Kuban rivers, the Azov Sea and the Kerch Strait represent the soft underbelly of the powerful Russian Federation. And since Russia has no geographic barriers to protect its heartland, control over these assets is that much more important. Holding all these properties in place is Crimea. The small peninsula is Russia's single most strategic asset in the Black Sea. A single fortification by its isthmus can hold back numerically large forces, sort of like how the Spartans used geography to their advantage in the Battle of Thermopylae. When Russia is in control of Crimea, its soft underbelly by the Sea of Azov is secure. But when a hostile power holds Crimea, Turkey for instance, it can harass and disrupt the movement of the Russian military, possibly even crippling the state defenses. In other words, without Crimea, the Russians would have to devote substantially more resources towards defensive measures. Crimea is of such strategic significance that the indigenous Tatars were ethnically cleansed from the area to make room for ethnic Russians that were loyal to Moscow. It's also why the Kremlin forcefully took the region from Ukraine and then annexed it in gross violation of international law. Other significant assets by the Black Sea include the Dnieper, Dniester, and Danube rivers. The Dnieper is an important navigable waterway that splits Ukraine in two. It's also the site of the Ukrainian capital, and the river marks one of the few geographical obstacles in the otherwise flat terrain of the European plain. The Dniester, meanwhile, forms the boundary between Slavic-speaking nations and those who speak a Latin-based language, ergo Romanians. The river is therefore a natural demarcation line. The Danube is the last major river that discharges into the Black Sea. The river draws its water from the tributaries that flow from the Alps and the Carpathians to the Romanian port of Constanța. It is in Constanța where the Americans have made their base. The NATO air base near Constanța offers the United States an entrance to the Black Sea without having to rely too much on allied Turkey. That said, Washington's interests in the Black Sea are inept, and the Americans keep their fleets in the Mediterranean for legal and technical reasons. So even though the White House has a foothold in the area, the main contestants for supremacy in the Black Sea are Russia and Turkey. The rivalry between Moscow and Ankara dates back to the 16th century when the Russian Empire faced threats on multiple sides. To its west, there was the powerful Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which had gone to war with Russia on several occasions and even briefly occupied Moscow at one point. To the south was the vigorous Crimean Khanate, which at the time controlled the northern shores of the Black Sea and often raided deep into Russian territory. This stalemate took a U-turn in 1667. Russia signed a truce with Poland and gained control over the Ukrainian territories east of the Dnieper River, including the strategic city of Kiev. 2 decades later, while the Poles battled the Turks in Vienna, the Russians negotiated for the perpetual concession of Kiev and eastern Ukraine. In exchange, the Russian Tsar joined the war against the Ottoman Empire. Having gained control over new territories in Ukraine, the Russian Empire was now capable of halting the Tatar raids. However, to elevate Russia among the ranks of global powerhouses, the Russians needed greater economic integration with West Europe. And to accomplish this goal, Russia needed a dependable, year-round warm water port. Its largest port at the time was situated in Arkhangelsk, which was so far up north that its waters stayed frozen much of the year, making it inoperable as a commercial port. By 1703, the grand city of St. Petersburg was established by the Gulf of Finland and quickly gathered much of Russia's maritime traffic. However, the Neva River, which flows into the Bay of St. Petersburg and the bay itself, froze during the winter. Nothing in Russia's geography came even close to a dependable warm water port, so to acquire one, Moscow had to look south. In the late 18th century, the Ottoman Empire had weakened as much as the Russian Empire had strengthened. In the meantime, the Crimean Tatars declined in size, allowing for the Russians to seize control of the Sea of Azov. Anchoring by the shores of the Black Sea granted Moscow access to the lucrative trade in the wider periphery. However, the Russian ports in the Azov Sea were constantly under pressure by the Ottoman Navy, which operated from the Crimean Peninsula. Over the next century, control over the Azov Sea went back and forth between the Ottomans and Russians. Eventually, in the Russo-Turkish War of 1739, Russia was granted the right to construct a lasting port in the Sea of Azov, but it wasn't allowed to sail its naval fleet in the Black Sea. This status quo changed again in 1774 when Russia caught the Ottoman Navy by surprise and ousted them from Crimea. The capture of Crimea fundamentally shifted the balance of power. The Ottomans lost their means of influence, and the Treaty of Küçük Kaynarca allowed the Russian fleets to move freely about in the Black Sea. Over the next centuries, Russia expanded its borders neatly along the shores of the Black Sea, conquering Georgia, Ukraine, Bessarabia, and so on. Yet, for all its attempts to dominate the Black Sea, the straits that link the sea to the world, the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, remained beyond the reach of the Russians. That stalemate remained in place over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries. By virtue of geography, Turkey had and continues to have the ultimate point of leverage over Russia. Even today, tensions remain high. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, geopolitical real estate around the Black Sea was once again up for grabs. Ukraine's independence in 1991 deprived Russia much of its shoreline, and the Euromaidan revolution in 2014 opened the door for further NATO expansion. Having NATO forces so close to the Azov Sea was unacceptable for the Kremlin, so the Russians forcefully annexed the Crimean Peninsula and backed the secessionist groups in eastern Ukraine to increase their leverage over the Kiev government. Russia then proceeded to construct a bridge across the Kerch Strait, but the bridge was deliberately built in a low clearance to restrict the passage of large vessels in the Sea of Azov, all for the sake of security. The stalemate in Ukraine remains risky, especially when considering the leverage of Turkey. If Russia escalates tensions on Ukrainian soil, NATO may decide to counter the Russians from the Black Sea. This would place Turkey in a tough position, as NATO would call for passage through the Bosporus. In such a scenario, Ankara would have to choose between suspending or upholding the Montreux Convention, which would either earn it resentment from NATO or hostility from Russia, an impossible situation in geopolitical terms. Technically, Russia has access to the Mediterranean via its naval base in Tartus in Syria. However, the Syrian port lacks the support infrastructure to house large fleets. Even so, Russia would still need to bring in supplies through the Turkish Straits. Thus, the Tartus base is of little consequence to the Turks. Beyond Ukraine and Syria, there is also strategic real estate in Georgia, Bulgaria, and Romania. In 2008, Russian troops invaded Georgia, which at the time was considering a bid for NATO membership. By the fifth day of fighting, Russia emerged victoriously and gained access to 4 new ports in Abkhazia along the Black Sea. This left the Georgians with only 2 operable ports and thereby significantly reduced the value Georgia could add to NATO. In Bulgaria, meanwhile, the Sofia government is investing and constructing new pipelines to Turkey in order to tap into the Russian-backed Turk Stream pipeline, which runs through the Black Sea. But beyond energy security, Bulgaria has no interests in the Black Sea, preferring to focus on the Balkans instead. In Romania, the story is different. Along its coastline, Romania operates advanced US-based anti-air defense systems and recently placed an order for additional systems. The city of Constanța also hosts a large NATO airbase, which acts as the headquarters for the US forces by the Black Sea. The dense concentration of weaponry along Romania's shore does little to contest Russia's military assets in Crimea, but they do complicate the Kremlin's maneuvers. That said, the footprint of the US Navy in the Black Sea is limited due to technical and legal reasons. Plus, the United States has an even more significant base by the city of Incirlik in Turkey. The Incirlik Air Base is close to major ports for logistics, and its range covers targets in the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, as well as the Middle East. This makes the Incirlik Air Base one of the most strategically placed assets in Eurasia. No other military base is quite as good. All in all, the nations by the Black Sea trade with one another, but also distrust each other, with some grievances dating back centuries. Russia and Turkey have the most complex of all relationships, competing and cooperating at different places and at different times. Moscow wants free access to the Mediterranean, for which it needs to compel Turkey to make authentic guarantees on rights of passage. However, the Russian-Turkish rivalry cannot be overthrown by force. In terms of sheer number of naval power, neither Turkey nor Russia has the upper hand in the Black Sea. The Turks have more frigates, submarines, missile boats, amphibious ships and overall personnel, but the Russians have a strong lead in naval aviation and possess long-range anti-ship cruise missile batteries. A fight between the two in the Black Sea battle space would likely end in a stalemate, so the rivalry continues, with each party trying to find a new angle, a new bargaining chip to renegotiate the status quo. For in the geopolitical chessboard, the Black Sea is a space of mistrust, much as it has always been. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment, subscribe and hit the like button. Thank you for watching and sağ ol.